Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinemily.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinemily.com/podcast. Today in the show, we have David Danhauer. He is a pediatrician and a former CMIO. His Kevin Emily article is titled 3 Pieces of Advice to Create a Meaningful Career. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and appreciate your opportunity to be able to talk about that.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Right. Kevin, I've been very blessed to have been able to work in my hometown where I was born and raised in Western Kentucky and have a phenomenal career in pediatrics. For 27 years, created a great practice there with multiple partners. But, I got to the point where, wow, I did it all. It was all done. It was really sort of stagnant and saw other things that I really could be doing more, and got involved with some IT work halfway through my career, linking with the hospital, getting an EMR together, sawing the sharing of that data, et cetera, and how important it was, and really enjoyed it. But also the administrative side, being on the hospital board, really getting excited about that, and working with administrators across the organization was very fun. So when an opportunity came up to implement a new EMR at the hospital, I jumped on it. I said, yeah, let's go. And I did it gratis. I just wanted to be there. I wanted to be engaged in it. And came to the point where the hospital was really needing somebody more full-time, et cetera. So, wow, I jumped on it and said, this is great. Let's go. And do you need a full-time CMIO? And I did it. It was great. And made that transition from a pediatric practicing primary care physician to a full-time administrator at the hospital. And for that, I did 10 years and had a great career there. I was able to travel, get out and see what the country was doing, not just what we were doing in our little corner of the world in Kentucky, but got to network with a number of people across the country. Very invigorating, exciting, new stuff, and bringing that back and incorporating that into our local situation was very fun. So
tell me what your day-to-day life was like as CMIO, because a lot of CMIOs, they're kind of the buffer between the clinician side and the administrative side. And when it comes to implementing the EMR, I'm sure there's a lot of negative connotations from the clinician side when it comes to EMRs.
Right.
So you're kind of caught between those two worlds. So tell us, what was it like day to day when you were a CMIO?
In the beginning, it was a lot of hand holding. That's exactly what my job was about. Fortunately, I had a great rapport with my physicians, and they understood and trusted me and what I was doing, where I was going, etc. So if I said something that didn't have a lot of angst against my fellow colleagues, and there were those who weren't comfortable with it, they really struggled in that. And so we had to help pull them along. I found very quickly I couldn't do it by myself, and I developed a provider support team that the hospital embraced pretty well. And started with one individual who was phenomenal in helping elbow to elbow support with my docs. We saw and showed significant improvement in physician satisfaction scores with that. And we grew that over time all the way to a five-person team. And they really were the best friends of the physicians. It took us a while to gain their comfort and ability to say, yeah, I need to reach out to that team from the physicians. But once they did, wow, we were their best friends. We helped them in any situation, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You tell me what you have a problem with in IT, and we will figure out a way to get it fixed for you. So that buffer really helped me then be able to do bigger and more things. And that was a very good, helpful thing for our docs, but also for me to reach out and do better.
So when you're advocating on behalf of physicians, sometimes that puts physicians, leaders like yourself, in tension or in conflict with administration. Did that happen to you? And if it did, how did you navigate that?
Right. Very early on in my career as a CMIO, I went to the CEO and said, tell me who I'm supposed to represent. Am I representing administration or am I representing our docs? And he pointed down this long hallway and he said, I've got plenty of hospital administrators. I need you to represent the docs. And with that CEO guidance, that led me to say, okay, I'm going to advocate only for the physicians. And that really helped clear the way for my role in being able to challenge the administration to do better for our docs. And that's where, again, the provider support team, when I came up with ideas for providers to do a better job, that rolled right through. It was very helpful. That leadership, though, from the CEO helped make that possible.
For those physicians who want to ascend a leadership ladder, I often say that they need to get in more roles like yourself, CMIO, in order for them to have a voice. Yes. What kind of advice do you have for practicing clinicians who want to follow in your footsteps and have more of a say when it comes to administrative issues?
think the first thing they have to do is get involved with the hospital. So many physicians have really worked away from that and not want to be engaged with any administrative activities at the hospital, whether it's chairing a committee, a medical committee of some sort, a chief of staff, saying I'd like to be on the hospital board. They have to show some form of leadership and engagement with hospital administration before that will go. And certainly committee chairs with medical committees, that's an absolute first place to go. And once you've shown that interest, once you show that leadership capability, administration is going to step up and say, oh my gosh, look at this physician. We really need to get them engaged more and more. But the physician has to make that first step. There is no doubt they have to be engaged and willing to step out of that pure clinical role and start to take on some administrative duties.
And for those physicians who are interested in taking those leadership roles, what kind of questions should they ask themselves to make sure that they're the right person for a job like that?
Sure. I think that they have to be comfortable to speak their mind, to be able to stand up and say, I feel this is right. I don't feel this is right. For those who are rubber stampers, very difficult for them to do anything effectively for administration. So you really got to be able to voice your opinion, communicate well, and stand up for what you truly do believe in and the why behind that. And the second piece is, are you willing to give of that time that's so precious as a physician? Are you willing to give up some of that time that you have for clinical work or family or other activities? Are you willing to spend that extra time? Is that, as I spoke in my article, do you have a passion to help make a difference and spend that energy and time that's so rare for this particular need? And you got to push yourself to be able to do that. And without the passion, you're not going to find the time. You're not going to find the energy. You're not going to find that effort is worthwhile for you and be successful.
All right. So let's talk about your article. It's titled 3 Pieces of Advice to Create a Meaningful Career. Now, how does the article come together?
Yeah. So I thought it was interesting in retrospect in retirement. What was it that really made me feel like as I retired that I was successful, that I had made a difference in the lives of my patients as well as the patients of my entire community with being a CMIO? How do I improve myself and also work to improve the environment for others? Focus on what can I do better? What are my gifts and how can I improve those for myself and for others? That drive was very important. And the second thing, that's where the true passion comes from. And knowing who you are and what your passions are, very critical. You will only be successful in being able to express what your passions are. I think the second piece is that good listener. I spoke to that in the article. And I learned very early in my residency that if I listened to my nurses, my life was going to be much, much better. And physicians and nurses, if you have that relationship, the teamwork is so much more effective than trying to go off on your own and be by yourself and shun the value of what nurses and others were doing. So as I learned to listen to them, I was so much more successful. And because of that, then all the way through my career, first of all, listening to my families, as I mentioned in the article, listening to those that come in and say, I think this is maybe what is going on, rather than assuming in the first 7 seconds of that patient visit, I know what's already going on. You have to wait and really put that mindset on hold, listen first, then start to make determinations. Even in my CMIO role, I knew who the physician was who was complaining and who was coming to me. I had to really put those feelings on hold and truly listen to what they were saying before I made that assumption. I can't tell you the number of times early in my career I got burned because I didn't hear both sides of a story. And so listening, I will come back to that again and again, how well that worked for me and helping me further my career and do such a much better job in both those careers. Servant leader, I can't speak to that more importantly. We hear that so many times. But if you're not willing to do the work that those people working for you are willing to do, you're never going to be successful. Nobody will ever listen to you. Nobody's going to be able to do that. So going back to, unstopping commode in my office when the kids plugged it up with something, if I'm not willing to do that myself, I'm never going to have any of my staff be able to do that. They're not going to be able to stand up and say, yeah, we need to get that done. To show that importance of the work that has to be done to make all of that teamwork work, You got to be able to do that. And so, dealing with a difficult physician, not just turfing that to somebody else, but absolutely saying, that's just as important. I need to make that impression with them. I need to step in and say something. I need to be the listener at this point and calm those anxieties and fears and work through what that next problem would be. So, really being able to do that work that others are expected to do, you've got to be that servant leader.
So one of the themes that comes through strongly is the importance of listening. Tell us what kind of traps physicians often fall into to not make them the listeners they should be. What are some red flags that physicians should look out for and improve their listening skills?
So one of the scenarios when I first started in my career, I went around to all the pediatricians in my community and introduced myself. And one of the pediatricians there said, David, if you listen to your patients, they're going to tell you what's wrong 80% of the time. And he said, if you really, really listen, they're going to tell you how to treat it 50% of the time. Your job is so much easier if you'll just listen. And I used that throughout my career. It was amazing recommendation. Green out of medical school, green out of residency, don't know a thing about what I'm going to be doing. It was great wisdom from his part. But how many times I did that? I'm at a bedside and I have a patient with diabetic ketoacidosis whose total body failure is occurring right in front of me. And I have every specialist that I know in my community trying to help me save this teenager's life. And over in the corner, one of the nurses made a suggestion in adding a pressor agent. And I thought, why didn't I think of that? I've got all the experts in this room. Hello, that's exactly what this patient needs. And that nurse saved that patient's life. Those examples go on and on in my career, but if I hadn't been listening, instead of being this commander of this great army, if I hadn't listened to the troops, that patient would not have survived. They're absolutely categorically, that patient survived because of the ability to take that team and listen to what's going on. I can't go on any further. I mean, it's just crazy. The listening is so, so important. And as I mentioned, I got burned so many times when I listened just to the physician or to whoever the screamer was at the time and not take into account what else was happening at the time and making a decision just off of that physician's need or want or whatever at that time. I made bad decisions in doing that. So when I stepped away from the situation, took all the data and listened to everyone, I then could make a better decision. And actually for the physician, it was a better decision as well. So those are some just specific examples. I tell you what, thank goodness. I learned that early in trying to listen, but it paid off greatly in my career.
We hear all the time about an increasing number of physicians who are burning out. They're leaving medicine mid-career. They don't have the passion for clinical care because of the bureaucracy and the fact that physicians today, they're just being disempowered and they're losing their autonomy.
Right.
What kind of advice do you have for these physicians to regain that meaning in their life and resume their careers? What kind of immediate actionable tips do you have for them?
Well, I think they need to look at what drives them. As I mentioned, it's the passion. And if patient care is still your passion, if it's making that difference in a patient's life, if that means that I can actually heal someone or improve their health and welfare, if that's truly your passion, you've got to look for ways where that actually does occur in your practice. Are you spending way too much time on the administrative side and not patient face-to-face care associated with that patient? Are the types of patients that you're dealing with not what's intriguing to you, that you need to get to a different clientele of patients, that you need to get to a different subset of patients, whether it's the clinical situation that they're dealing with, to make that a difference. When I left my pediatric practice, well over 50% of the patients I saw every single day were psychiatric in nature. And I was not formally trained in psychiatric, but I did everything possible to do as well as I could and read and studied and CME and anything and everything, whether it was ADHD, depression, anxiety, et cetera, goes on and on. I did everything I could to try and improve my skills to help those patients. But I quickly was learning that those patients drained me significantly. It took an amazing amount of effort to try and help manage those patients. And so I had to take a big look at that and say, even though I'm really good at what I was doing, I knew that was not where I could extend my career and continue to keep doing that. I was going to have to rework something significant in my patient volumes and clientele. I was going to have to shift something in that to make a difference, or truly burnout was where I was headed. So you got to look at where you are, what you're doing, what excites you, what is your passion in that patient care, and make a shift, make a difference. Do whatever you can to protect yourself, your family, your time, your efforts, etc., to be able to be a much more effective physician.
So, how did you go about making that shift? A lot of physicians are stuck in a rut. They
Yes,
have a steady paycheck and they just keep what they're doing, even though they're not passionate about it. But you
right.
actually took that next step and made a shift. You
Yes.
you made a difference, and a lot of physicians simply can't do that. So, how did you?
So all along in that career, I tried to develop what I felt like were my gifts, and whether it was leadership or administration, whatever it was, I kept trying to develop what those gifts were. What was I good at? What did I enjoy? And I kept advancing those little things. And so in my own situation, because I had gone out and done things in leadership, I had established myself as a leader in multiple committees, on the hospital board, et cetera, all those things, being on nonprofit organizations and leading other organizations, church leadership. I did all those things. I had developed those skills that were attractive to my next employer. And not knowing that's what I was doing, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. It was fun for me to do that administrative side. I was the practice leader. I led our practice. I did all the administrative work for our practice. So the hiring, the firing, and et cetera, I did all of that and hired an administrator to help me do those roles, et cetera. So I did that development of my own self, my own skills, my own gifts, and that's what allowed me then to go out and find other paths. I will tell you, it was a huge shift to leave clinical work to go to administrative side. But if I hadn't had that prep work all along, I don't know that I would have been able to make that transition. I was fortunate. I will tell you, I was, and I've worked at it half-time for 18 months. Who gets to play in a new job for 18 months to decide whether you like it or not, right? That was a huge thing for me. And I knew already after 18 months, I'm in it. I'm on that. I really have enjoyed it, but knew I couldn't do both. I couldn't do my clinical work in a primary care situation and be an administrator with CMIO roles. I couldn't do both. I was failing miserably at both. I had to make a jump one way or the other and commit myself to that. I think specialists have a little better role in that they don't have that ongoing primary care relationship with patients. Specialists are they deal with situation and move on, deal with situation and move on. So you don't have that long-term relationship built up with patients as much as primary care. They many times are going into these roles much easier than what you would see in some of the primary care roles.
We're talking to David Danhauer. He's a pediatrician and former CMIO. His Kevin MD article is titled Three Pieces of Advice to Create a Meaningful Career. David, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Right. I was blessed to know what my passions were, and I was able to follow through with those passions and really help me focus where is it I want to go in my life and my career because of where my passions lie from the very beginning of being able to really enjoy being with kids. I knew I had a gift in playing with kids all day long. What a gift that was. And I made that a career, and wow, what a gift that was. And I knew I loved computers and the data and management and the technology associated with that. And wow, I got to make a career out of that. It was my passions that drove those and gave me the energies to do really well in both those careers. The bottom line is know what your gifts and passions are. You will always be successful. You will always have joy in what work you do because you're driven by your passions.
David, thank you so much for sharing your story time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Kevin, my pleasure always. Thank you for your opportunity.